Let's see. All right. So today's lecture is muscles of the lower leg. I'm going to, let's see, let's turn this display off. Turn this display off, and then I'll turn it back on when we get to the muscles and the circles. Okay, so just a little reminder of low 310 reminder. The ankle joint is happening here, right? That's your talus bone. This is your tibia. This is your fibula. And you see how the tibia and the fibula make like a little cave? That's a concave surface. And then the convex surface fits in like a, let's say a ball and socket, but like a Lego, right? The piece fits inside the socket right there. So the ankle joint allows dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. Therefore, we need muscles that pull in the direction of dorsiflexion. Those are going to be dorsiflexors. Muscles that pull in the direction of plantar flexion are going to be plantar flexors. The axis that the ankle joint moves about is from its bilateral axis, right here. So muscles that cross in the front are going to be dorsiflexion pullers, and muscles that cross in the posterior are going to be plantar flexion pullers. Dorsiflexors pull this way, plantar flexors pull that way. Whew. Now, the subtalar and transverse tarsal joints is a little tricky because it's a gliding joint. So there's not one true point like on the bilateral axis. There's kind of an average. And it's mostly, especially in anatomical position, it's mostly frontal plane, mostly AP. It's not beautifully pure AP. The average AP axis of the subtalar joint passes between your first two rays, your big toe and your second toe. So this little piggy went to market. The little piggy that stayed home. It's between the one that went to market and the one that stayed home. So it passes through here, up through there, and it glides back and forth. That's the inversion, eversion, right? Subtalar, all that happens underneath the talus to glide and make sure your foot stays on the ground. Mostly that's what it's for, so that you can go laterally and maintain compression of as much surface area of your foot as the ground as possible. If it didn't allow that glide, when you go to shift, your foot would come off the ground. You want to try to lay flat as much as possible so that your feet can grip the ground to produce friction, okay? Inversion and eversion. So today's lecture is going to focus on the muscles that pull in the direction of dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, inversion, and eversion. We're going to have plantar flexors. We're going to have plantar flexors. We're going to have dorsiflexors. We're going to have inverters, and we're going to have everters. You're going to notice that the inverters cross medial, the everters cross lateral, dorsiflexors anterior, plantar flexors posterior. Okay. Phase one. Now phase two. Okay. So that's phase one. Phase two, I'm going to show you the circle, ankle and subtalar joint circle. I'm going to explain how they are two joints in one circle. We had that before. Remember elbow and radial ulna, they live close enough together and they have different muscles that influence both joints. So we can combine the circles if we understand where the different parts are. Okay. So I'm going to pull up the circle. I'm going to also list the different muscles you're accountable for. And then we'll go into the specific muscles and how they pull. Okay, ready? On two, ready, break. I'm going to go turn off the light. Don't go anywhere. All right, everybody. So this is on Moodle, but this is your ankle and subtalar joint cross-sectional anatomy circle. So The bilateral axis, as you can see up there, the bilateral axis represents the ankle joint. So the muscles that I'm going to teach you that cross anterior are going to be dorsiflexors, and the posterior crossing muscles, plantar flexors. Right away, you should see you have more plantar flexors than dorsiflexors. It's because to move your body takes a little bit more oomph than to control the speed about which your foot plantar flexes through eccentric work. That's what the biggest function of those dorsiflexors are. The AP axis, remember, it's an average, but the average AP axis, that's what's going to separate inverter pullers from eversion pullers. Those are your inverters and everters. So that's your subtalar joint. So on your key, you see subtalar joint. And you're going to have several muscles that have multiple functions, like the TA. I'm going to teach you guys what the tibialis anterior is, but that is a ankle dorsiflexor and a subtalar joint everter. So the point is that this is where things could be tricky. The tibialis anterior has single functions at two different joints. Ankle joint, dorsiflexor, subtalar joint, inverter, okay? So we're going to get around. Notice that the polar axis is NA. That's not alcoholic, that's not applicable. It means the ankle doesn't rotate in its transverse plane. So that's cool, that's less you got to worry about, okay? So the muscles that we are going to have to account for at the ankle and subtalar joint: tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus. I'm seeing it on the screen backwards, so that's why I'm kind of referencing. Extensor digitorum longus. I'm assuming this is peroneus longus and brevis. No, peroneus tertius, tibialis posterior, flexor digitorum longus, flexor hallucis longus, peroneus brevis, peroneus longus, soleus, and gastron. Thumb is hallux. Thumb is pallix, and big toe is hallux. So we have muscles that get into the toe that influence the toe, but they cross the ankle to get there. Kind of like your flexor digitorum, okay? But your big toe is big toe. All right, let's get it. All right. So the first muscle we're going to look at is your tibialis anterior, a muscle. Let me try to find a place to park myself. Okay. The tibialis anterior, a anterior muscle that runs along the tibia. Notice it doesn't cross the knee joint. This is going to be fun. Doesn't cross the knee joint. It comes down and crosses the ankle in the front. This is an anterior view. Crosses the ankle in the front. So the first function first function that's inferred is dorsiflexor, pulling in the direction of dorsiflexion. And it also crosses, here's our little piggy string, and it crosses medial on the inside. So the point is that that muscle pulls in a direction of inversion at the subtalar joint. So what is the function of the tibialis anterior? The tibialis anterior is an ankle joint dorsiflexor and a subtalar and transverse tarsal joints inverter. Okay, rewind it if you have to write that down. Tibialis anterior, ankle joint dorsiflexor, subtalar joint inverter. The next anterior muscle we're going to talk about is the extensor hallucis longus. That is a extensor of the big toe. Now, here's where things get a little tricky. The ankle has two different forms of flexion. You guys remember that. The toes, however, don't. The toes have typical finger flexion, finger extension, right? If you want to think of it as with your fingernails, right? Flexion goes kind of into a ball. Extension goes towards like your fingernails, like your dorsum, right? Finger flexion, finger extension, same for your toes. Toe flexion, toe extension. So the extensor hallucis longus doesn't mean ankle extension. It means big toe extension, pulling in the direction of big toe extension. Now, to get to the big toe, it crosses the ankle anteriorly, and then this is where it crosses the subtalar joint. So there's my axis in between the little piggies, the first and second little piggies, and it's on the medial side. So it's going to pull that big toe in a direction of inversion. Okay. Extensor hallucis longus. These digit, especially the extensor digit muscles, are very important to ankle function because of your shoes. They get to push when those extensors push, they push on the webbing of your shoes, and then that can help generate force in a direction of dorsiflexion to influence ankle motion. That's why when you wear sandals, your gait changes, your walking changes, your strides get a little shorter. You don't have things to push onto like your toe box. Okay, function of the extensor hallucis longus. This is the so what. This is what you got to know. Extensor hallucis longus. Ankle joint dorsiflexor, subtalar joint inverter. Okay. Right. Now let's drift over to this picture and look at our digits. Extensor digitorum. So a muscle that goes out, fans out into the other piggies. The one that stayed home, ate roast beef, had none, wee, all the way home. All of those guys get one common fanned out string to pull on. This string runs lateral. Look, here's my axis in between my first and second piggy. It runs lateral, so it's going to pull in a direction of eversion at the subtalar joint. But it still crosses anterior, so it's going to be an ankle joint dorsiflexor. Ankle joint dorsiflexor, subtalar joint everter for your extensor digitorum. Okay. So that's one muscle, two muscle, three muscle. Now let me show you the lateral muscles. Okay. Here's a lateral view. That's an outside view. Here we have a family of peroneals. Peroneus, peroneal, potato. You have sister muscles. The peroneus longus and brevis are sister muscles. And then you have a cousin. A tertius is a cousin. Cousin has something relative in common and something that it doesn't. We'll get to that shortly. So staying in our dorsiflexion component, we're going to talk about the tertius first. This is the bilateral axis of the ankle. So the tertius crosses anterior, crosses in the front. So it's going to pull in the direction of dorsiflexion at the ankle joint. It crosses the subtalar joint laterally. So it's going to be an everter, a dorsiflexor everter. The peroneus longus and brevis cross the ankle joint posteriorly in the back. So because they cross posteriorly, here's the axis, they are going to pull in the direction of plantar flexion puller. But they also cross laterally. That's how they're related to the tertius. They all three cousins cross laterally. So they're going to be everters, tertius being a dorsiflexor, longus and brevis being plantar flexors. Remember, longus and brevis does not infer muscle length, it infers tendon length. That'd be a good test question. A longus muscle has a long tendon, short muscle belly. A brevis muscle has a short tendon with a long muscle belly. So longus and brevis is tendon length. Okay. So remember, look, so this is showing you where these muscles insert. For function, it doesn't matter. This muscle could insert here. It could wrap around. It could write my name in cursive and insert it. For function, it's about where does it cross. In grad school, origin insertion is going to be a lot more important, especially for my athletic trainers and my therapists. For those of you that are going to be going into orthopedics, you have to palpate. You're going to have to know origins and push it. But in terms of function, and that's what all of you guys are going to be into, regardless of what your major concentration is. What do muscles do? And so that's why I'm emphasizing function. Okay. All right, let's keep going. All right, the big bad gastrocnemius. So the gastroc actually has two heads. It has a medial and a lateral head. So let's try to figure out, this is the inside, this is the outside, there's your little toe. So this would be the medial head, lateral head. This muscle blends into one common tendon, the Achilles tendon. It's going to blend in with another muscle that I'm going to show you right after this that lives underneath. We had precedent for that. Remember the biceps brachii, a two-headed muscle in the arm, lives on top of the brachialis. Very similar. The two-headed, big, powerful, multi-articular muscle lives underneath a uni-articular muscle. There's all kinds of examples of upper and lower extremity versions of this. So what does it do? Crosses the ankle posteriorly, pulls in the direction of plantar flexion. Now, the big toe, the front of the foot, all those tarsal bones, right? They glide on each other. A lot of that's up front. When you start to get to the back, you only have one subtalar articulation. In other words, the subtalar, well, guess what lives under the talus? The calcaneus. So when you get back to here, there's really no lateral, medial. It's just pulling right on the AP axis. So there is no inversion, eversion in anatomical position. Plantar flexor. Okay. Now, this muscle crosses the knee. Now, usually I do more of these muscles, but because this is an online class, I'm trying to keep it simple. Because of the stretchy components of muscles, the elastic components, the tendons and the fascia, all the myosins and the inert stretchy materials of muscles, not the contractile components, longer is stronger. So if you take a TheraBand and you start to stretch it, as you lengthen it, the more it wants to return to its original shape. With structures that have elasticity, longer is stronger. So same thing with skeletal muscles, longer is stronger. So when you flex your knee, imagine this is a TheraBand. When you flex your knee, you shorten that muscle and you put it on slack. And therefore it pulls less on the other end. If I have a TheraBand that's this long and I shorten it this long, and if I shorten it up here, it's going to pull less down here. If I lengthen it up here, it's going to pull more down here. So that's why when you're doing seated calf raises, you emphasize a different muscle than the gastrocnemius, because when you're seated, your knee is flexed. The gastrocnemius is a knee flexor. It pulls in the direction of knee flexion. So when you flex the knee, you shorten that muscle. Okay. And you're going to emphasize the other plantar flexors, mainly the one I'm about to show you, the soleus. Okay. The soleus is named after a fish, which is like a flounder. It's called the solefish, flatfish. So the soleus is your lower extremities version of the brachialis. Okay, lives underneath. Bi-headed muscle gets to piggyback on top of it, get an extra pulley. Soleus is not affected by the knee position. So when you put the gastroc on slack, like when you're doing seated calf raises, you don't put the soleus on slack. So the soleus can take up that slack and do more of the plantar flexor work. Soleus, two heads of the gastroc, form a common structure called the triceps surae. You may hear that in the clinic. So I want you guys to know that because it's commonly referred to as a triceps surae. It's like a team. It's like a tag team. Okay? It's like a band. Okay? That plantaris, very feeble, very weak muscle, not one of your prime movers, so that's why I'm not including it. Sticking to the posterior compartment. So again, deep, you have these mirror muscles to the front, meaning that we had extensor digitorum. Well, you're going to have flexor digitorum. And we had extensor hallucis, or you're going to have a flexor hallucis. Okay, so you're going to have some mirror muscles here. You had a tibialis anterior, where you're going to have a tibialis posterior. Here is your tibialis posterior, crosses the ankle posteriorly, so it's going to be a plantar flexor, crosses the subtalar joint medially, so it's going to be an inverter. Tibialis posterior, plantar flexor, inverter. This muscle is kind of neat because it's actually involved in your arch. It's a very important muscle to kind of lift your medial longitudinal arch. So therapists will innervate and work out that muscle to try to help people that have flat feet muscularly to try to help get that arch up. Okay. Tibialis posterior. You also, in this posteromedial compartment, you have flexor hallucis and you have flexor digitorum. In the anterior compartment, they were separate, but in the posterior compartment, they're in the same apartment. Okay. So let's see. Flexor hallucis longus and flexor digitorum longus. Some people will remember these muscles compartmentally with the phrase Tom, Dick, and Harry is the posteromedial compartment. Tom for tibialis posterior, Dick for flexor digitorum longus, Ann is for your artery and nerve, and then Harry is flexor hallucis longus. So these are sister muscles at the ankle and subtalar joint. Okay. All right. So let's review. Remember, I'm trying to keep it to exactly what you need to know and nothing more, nothing less. Okay. First muscle, tibialis anterior. What is the function of the tibialis anterior? It pulls in the direction of ankle dorsiflexion. It pulls in the direction of subtalar joint inversion. It's a dorsiflexor inverter. Extensor hallucis longus, dorsiflexor inverter. Extensor digitorum longus, dorsiflexor everter. Peroneus tertius, dorsiflexor everter. Tibialis posterior, plantar flexor inverter. Flexor digitorum longus, plantar flexor inverter. Flexor hallucis longus, plantar flexor inverter. Peroneus brevis, dorsiflexor everter. Plantar flexor everter. Peroneus longus, plantar flexor everter. Soleus, plantar flexor. Gastrocnemius, plantar flexor. So where's tertius? Peroneus tertius, dorsiflexor everter. I want to make sure. I might have said it, but I want to make sure. Now, the easiest way to learn all those functions is to picture all of those muscles and how they sit in one classroom of your ankle and subtalar joint. Imagine a cross section. Imagine this foot being like this. Okay? And there's your ankle joint, it's your bilateral, and there's your AP. Okay. So if someone asks me, Dr. Campbell, who are the dorsiflexors? What are the major muscles that pull in the direction of dorsiflexion? I just think of who sits in that circle. I just imagine the circle and say tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus, extensor digitorum longus, peroneus tertius. If they say, well, who are the everters? Close my eyes, I imagine a circle, right? Extensor digitorum, pronis tertius, pronis longus, pronis brevis. Inverters, well, those are the medial crossing muscles. Tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus, tibialis posterior, flexor hallucis longus, flexor digitorum. Who are the plantar flexors? Tibialis posterior, flexor hallucis longus, flexor digitorum longus, gastroc, soleus, pronis longus, pronis brevis. What is the functions of a single muscle? Okay, what muscle do you want to talk about? Tibialis posterior. Well, what does it sit? Tibialis posterior sits in the back, so it's a plantar flexor. It sits medial, so it's an inverter. Plantar flexor inverter. What about the gastroc? Where does it sit? Posteriorly, plantar flexor. It sits the fence, neither medial nor lateral, so no subtalar joint function. See how this works? Huh? How would you stretch plantar flexors? By dorsiflexing. That's how you lengthen something that pulls in the direction of plantar flexion. How do you stretch an inverter? By everting. How do you stretch an everter? By inverting. How do you stretch a dorsiflexor? By plantar flexing. Okay. All right. Guys, the test, I can't, because like I said, I've lost the advantage of lecturing to instant feedback. So I'm not going to give the kind of developed examples that I usually do. This has got to be straightforward. What's the function? And remember, function is direction of pull. So if I try to trick you by saying eccentric work or even showing eccentric work, like coming down from a toe raise, the plantar flexors make you go up with concentric work. They keep you up with isometric work, and then they lower you down with eccentric work. So if I give you an eccentric one lowering you down, and I say, hey, identify one of the muscles responsible for lowering you down during a toe raise, still a plantar flexor. It's one of them. And I'll list some different muscles. It's got to be a plantar flexor. Plantar flexors make you go up on your toes, keep you up on your toes, let you come down off your toes. Same muscles. So let's think of what was different in doing a toe raise, like a whole repetition of a toe raise. What's different? The motion's different. Plantar flexion and then dorsiflexion. The contraction was different. Concentric, eccentric. So what was the same? The muscles were the same. So how can we discuss the muscles as being the same when you had different motions? We can't say those muscles' function was plantar flexion because plantar flexion was only 1/2 of the entire repetition. Those muscles were plantar flexion pullers. They pulled in the direction of plantar flexion. They created plantar flexion, but then they also allowed dorsiflexion. Okay. All right. Can't stress that enough. All right, guys. This is the lecture for the ankle and subtalar joint. You will also be accountable for the knee lecture, which I'm going to do. And for Monday, you're going to have that as a Monday lecture. Then Tuesday is going to be the muscles of the hip. And then Thursday is going to be a review. You guys can send in any questions you want, clarifications. Send that to me in the next couple of days so that I could put together a big review lecture for you guys for Thursday. And then for Wednesday, exam on Thursday. So let me rephrase. Ankle, subtalar, knee, Monday lecture. That's today's lecture. Hip for Tuesday. Review Wednesday. Lecture Thursday. Okay, we're good? All right, guys, be well.